So here in part one, I will discuss predicting dry matter intake. So predicting based on the forage or the hay that we're feeding, how much is that goat going to consume, or how much do we predict that they would consume of that feed stuff? And there's some tools that we can utilize to help us predict this. To get started though, I wanted to show you some results from a Kentucky hay analysis. This is a summary of a lot of different hay analysis that were done throughout the state of Kentucky, hay samples that were collected in Kentucky, and looking at various components of that hay, the quality of the hay. So there's a few different terms here. We have NDF, TDN, and what we call CP. So NDF is the neutral detergent fiber. That's our measure of the fibrous component, the plant cell wall component to our hays. That's going to help us predict what that intake is going to be. We have the TDN, or the total digestible nutrients. That's our energy component to that feed stuff. And then our CP is our crude protein. So we have various different types of hay: alfalfa grass mixes, just a grass-based hay, clover grass mixes, small grains like ryegrass type hays, and then our warm season grass hays. And you can see how the NDF value fluctuates between those different types of hay, how our energy and our protein also vary as we look at different types and sources of our hays. So this is for reference for you all to utilize and utilize it as a reference when you're thinking about developing some of these rations and predicting that intake. But it's always important to get a hay sample done. When you get a hay sample, when you either make your own hay or purchase in some hay, make sure you get a hay sample collected, a hay analysis done, because without that, we really don't know for sure what we're feeding. That hay test is going to tell us a lot about the quality of the feed stuff that we're providing to our goats. So when it comes to predicting dry matter intake, we can estimate dry matter intake as a percentage of animal body weight utilizing this equation, where dry matter intake equals 120 divided by the percent NDF. And again, NDF is that neutral detergent fiber. It's a measure of the hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin, the plant cell wall components in that forage. So let's walk through an example. So we have the grass hay. This is straight off that Kentucky hay analysis. Our grass hay is 63.4% NDF. So we plug that into the equation. We have 120 divided by 63.4. Now it's important here, utilize the whole number. I realize that it's a percentage. Don't convert it to a decimal. Leave it as is and just take 120 divided by that percent NDF, 63.4 in this case. And that's going to give you the percentage of body weight that we would predict in dry matter intake. So in this case, that comes out to 1.89% of body weight in dry matter intake for this grass hay. So if we have a 130-pound doe and she's consuming 1.89% of her body weight daily, we take 130, multiply that by 0.0189, we get 2.46 pounds of dry matter. So every day, if we were feeding this grass hay to a 130-pound doe, we would predict that she would consume about 2.46 pounds of that hay in dry matter every day. In general, this dry matter intake is going to vary between about 1.5% to about 2.5% to 3% of the animal's body weight. So the higher the NDF, the higher the plant cell wall component, the lower the dry matter intake every day. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that in general, it's going to fluctuate somewhere in this 1.5 to 2.5 range. So I took that equation and applied it to our various different types of hay here from our Kentucky hay analysis. So we have the same hays here listed. We have those NDF values. And then here I provided our predicted dry matter intake as a percentage of body weight for each type of hay. And then our predicted dry matter intake as a quantity for a 130-pound doe. So you can see for a hay like alfalfa that's relatively low on NDF, our predicted dry matter intake is 2.73% of body weight, which would come out to just over 3.5 pounds of intake per day. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have a hay like some of our warm season grasses, where NDF could be as high as close to 67%. Here, our predicted dry matter intake is only 1.79% of body weight. Those animals would only consume about 2.33 pounds per day. So their intake, their dry matter intake, is going to vary greatly based on the NDF values of the hays of the forages that those animals are consuming. So this is a great place to start with your forage-based nutrition program. This is a great place to start and determine what's the predicted level of intake based on the quality of the forage that we're feeding. And then I'll show you here in the next part how we can take that information and ask ourselves the question, what are the nutrient requirements of the animal, and is this forage meeting those nutrient requirements? So with that, that concludes this part, and we'll move on to part two, determining if those nutrient requirements are met.